Amen. Welcome to Downey Avenue Christian Church on this solemn and sacred day as we gather together to remember and honor the life and the legacy of our dear, dear friend, Garnett Day. I wish I didn't have to speak those words. I wish, as all of you do, that we had one more time to be with Garnett, one more occasion to be together. And yet I can just imagine if we had that one more time with him now, how embarrassed he would be to know that there is standing room only at his funeral. And so whether you are seated here or in our wraparound section, or in the back or in the balcony or in the video overflow room in Century Hall, we gather here together in one spirit. No matter where we're seated, no matter where we come from, we gather here together because what other way is there to remember and celebrate and honor Garnett Day than by being together? A man whose life and legacy was devoted to bringing people together. We come here together in this place, not just to show up for a service, but to honor Garnett's life, to honor his legacy that lives on by committing ourselves to let the best of him live on in the best of us. On this solemn day, as hard as it may be, we know that this is a cause worth celebrating. The cause of justice and love and hope for which Garnett lived his life. And so we are honored by your presence here. We're honored by the memory of Garnett that is here with us. And we honor the presence of God that connects all of us, in the way that Garnett dreamed about. Let us invoke that spirit of love as we ask God's blessing in a spirit of prayer. Holy One, eternal God, our Creator, in whom we live and move and have our being, from whom we come when we enter into this world, and unto whom we return when we pass from it. We come here with grateful hearts to thank you, God, for the privilege of knowing our dear brother Garnett. We thank you for the goodness and the kindness, the compassion that he shared while he was here on this earth across 88 wonderful years. God, we thank you for the joys that Garnett shared with every person in this room and beyond. We thank you for the memories of Garnett that are now our cherished possessions to hold close forever and ever. Holy One, we pray for a real sense of your presence, of his presence, here in this place as we gather together, seeking comfort and strength. May it be so. We pray all this, Holy One, in the name of your Son, who now welcomes our dear brother Garnett home into your arms. Amen. Let us rise in body or spirit as you are able to sing together hymn 33, a hymn that Garnett knew and loved very well, How Great Thou Art. be seated. A reading from 1 John chapter 4, verses 7 through 12. Beloved, let us love one another, because love is from God. Everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, for God is love. God's love was revealed among us in this way. God sent his only Son into the world that we might live through him. And this is love. Not that we loved God, but that God loved us. And beloved, since God loved us so much, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God. If we love one another, then God lives in us, and God's love is perfected in us. Here ends the reading. Only what else is there to say than that God's love was perfected in Garnett Day? Garnett might not have been perfect, but Garnett showed us God's perfect love in so many ways, time and time again, across not only years, but across generations of people who have been affected by Garnett and by Carolyn. People who over and over again since he passed have reached out with stories and memories and hopes and glimpses into the kind of amazing person that he was. What a remarkable occasion it is to honor the life of a true giant. Garnett Day. As we gather from far and wide all over the country, we know that the people who are here among us in this place represent countless other people, not only around the country, but literally around the world, whose lives were made better, whose communities were made better because of who Garnett was. A day like today is, of course, filled with all kinds of bittersweet emotions. Yes, we grieve. We grieve deeply the loss, the difficult loss of a husband, of a father, a grandfather, a friend, a fellow church member, a justice warrior, a man who tirelessly worked for peace. Today we mourn the reality that he's not here, at least physically, to make us laugh, to make us smile one more time. We mourn that he's not here to remind us of what life is really all about in the way that only Garnett could do. We mourn that he's not here to hold us close, to embrace us one more time. What we would give for that. When we come to this place in a spirit of loss, we know undoubtedly that the world is just a little bit smaller of a place without Garnett Day in it. And whenever death comes to someone that we love and someone that we care about so deeply, of course it leaves us feeling lost. The pain of those real and genuine feelings is our souls reminder deep within how much this person meant to us, how much he changed our lives by knowing him, by being loved by him. That pain reminds us of how much he mattered, what of a difference he made in our lives. And yet, the strange thing about all of this is that even while Garnett is not physically here with us today, in some strange way, he really is more alive now in each of us as we gather here. Imagine how honored and humbled Garnett would be. Imagine what he would say to each one of us if he could be here today. He is here, friends. He is here. He lives on in each one of you. Every time deep within, you summon the courage to love someone a little deeper, to challenge something within yourself to be more than what we would be otherwise. I can just hear the voice of Garnett whispering to each one of us, live. Live fully. Don't cry over me. Go out and live. What else is there? But to be sad that such a life has come to an end, except that we also have so much to celebrate. My goodness, how much is there to look at this man and think how much we have to celebrate, even in the midst of our grief, even in the midst of our pain and our loss, how much we have to say, thank you, God. Thank you, Garnett, for showing us what life can be when we live it to the fullest. Not long ago, my wife, Marilyn, and I saw Garnett in the hospital. And just before he passed, even as his voice had faded some by that point, my wife and I stood on either side of his bed, and he took our hands on each side and dragged us in a little bit closer and said, don't ever forget. Love, love, love. That's what it's all about. Love, what else is there in life? He said, but love. If that's what life is about, if that's what life is about, then Garnett is here with us today. Because we loved him and he loved us. And so we remember that as hard as this loss is, as lingering as that pain may be, we remember that in some mysterious way, God's love continues to connect us with this great saint. Even in the spirit of loss, Garnett showed us that God's love speaks, that God's love is worth speaking for. And the power of hope that he showed us, the power of hope reminds us every single day, even in loss, no, especially in loss, that nothing can separate us from the love of God. We read that in the scripture. But it's up to each one of us to learn here today that while nothing can separate us from God's love, that it's our choice as to whether or not anything can separate us from Garnett's love. That's our choice here today, to celebrate his love, to say the ways that we see it in each of you gathered here, in the stories that we share. And for now, all we can do as we summon one another to find that inner courage, to be our best Garnet, as we look for that strength until we see him again, don't ever forget, he's not just watching over us from above. He's living through us from within. May Garnet live on every single day. Live.
No, I'm not going to say it that way because you'll sit there. Do sing along or we will have to walk out into the audience to encourage you on these next three songs.
In just a moment, we will hear from a few people who knew Garnett well, who will come to share stories and memories, just a small fraction of the ones that we treasure and hold dear to our heart. There is surely far more to say about the life and legacy of Garnett Day than one service could possibly allow. I mean, we could literally be here all night long telling stories about things Garnett used to do or say or get arrested for. But you know, if we did that, if we stayed all night long into the wee morning hours of Election Day, sitting in here, instead of being out there drumming up people to vote, I think Garnett would find a way to come back and haunt us. In every part of Garnett's life, and no less even now in his death, Garnett always wanted to point us not to celebrate his own accomplishments, but to live our own lives with a little more love and a little more compassion. From the very beginning, Garnett's humble upbringing through the Great Depression taught him early on a different way to define success, a different way to show us what a good life looks like. Garnett's sister June wasn't able to travel to be here today, but we know that she is here in spirit and listening from afar, and she sends her love and greetings to you all. And whether it's from the time Garnett grew up until his final moments here in Indianapolis, we can't look at any part of Garnett's life without seeing the lasting impact that church had on him. He was a preacher's kid, God help him, a seminary student, and later as a minister and a devoted servant to the denomination, he came to appreciate a deep love for what church could be if we were willing to do it right. When Garnett and Carolyn came to Indianapolis, his work through the denomination That's all stuff you can read about who Garnett was. But what you can't read about in the history books, what you can't pick up from the stories that people tell unless you knew him, was just how much he loved the person right in front of him. It wasn't about a cause. It was about people. Garnett loved people. He was kind and compassionate. And yes, he was a justice warrior. And he also loved to go sit at the zoo for hours upon end looking at the orangutans. He also loved to sit and hold babies, even ones that didn't belong to him. This place is not the same without Garnett being here. Without waiting for Garnett to walk down the aisle at the end of the service, hugging every single person along the way. Not too long ago, maybe a year or so ago, he came down the aisle with a newspaper in his hand. And though he was leaning on his walker, he waited and waited in that line to hand me the newspaper article. And he wanted me to read the story about children in Africa who were being taken advantage of. And he said, "I don't know what we can do about it, Pastor, but maybe at least we can let people know what we think. Will you write a letter to President Trump?" All the way until the end, Garnett spent his life looking for ways to make the world a better place. He never gave up that work. And perhaps the only thing that impressed me more than his public legacy, his public witness, the only thing that impressed me more than that was just how quietly he could love someone right in front of him. Never in my life have I met someone so proud of their family as Garnett and Carolyn. None of you people on the front few rows can get out of bed in the morning without one of them bragging about how well you did it. But the truth is, all of you have given them so much to be proud of. And in your own ways, even while life took you to different places, you took a piece of Garnett with you wherever you went. All of you reflect him in some way. What a gift. I think this is actually the first funeral service where I sat down with the family and was asked, "Now tell me about your Christology." It's the kind of thing preachers dream about being asked in seminary. All of you reflect him in some way. And Carolyn, how could we tell Garnett's story without celebrating the ways that you two made each other better? You came from different worlds, and you found ways to make your own world and to make the world around you a better place. He lives on through you, through the beautiful family that you have created together. You two were partners, and you still are. Friends and family, all those who loved Garnett, let us remain forever grateful for who he was And remember that as we come together through our grief to celebrate him today, that we can do so in good conscience, in clear sight, knowing that right now in this moment, there are a whole lot of people who are saying, well done. Well done, my good and faithful servant. Let us join in that chorus together.
We're going to do a couple of songs that I wish we didn't have. I wish were not so appropriate. I wish these were just songs we said, yeah, in the old days they sang these songs. These songs need to be brought back because as much work as Garnett has done and all the rest of the folks have done, we are still where we were in some ways. When you look at what happened in Pittsburgh and some other places. So Garnett's work is still needing to be done, and if you want to keep Garnett with us, that's the best way to do it. And one of the ways is to sing, because you have to keep your spirits up when you're doing this kind of work. So this is one of those songs that Pete Seeger, and I always thought that Garnett kind of looked like Pete Seeger at some time in his life. That may just be because I'm a musician, but anyway. These are a couple of songs that Pete Seeger would do, so I'm going to try and do them on the banjo a little bit. Please sing along. You will know them.
Okay, I'll start with when Mark was talking about people who could speak, I thought, oh, yes, I love Garnett, I'll speak. And then I didn't really think about how many people would be here or all the other people that could probably say so much better things. But I'll have to admit, Garnett and Carolyn were one of the first people that really empowered me. It was sitting in their living room. It was some kind of youth group meeting that they brought kids to be representatives. And I remember them after the meeting, because I had spoke up, and they said, Georgianne, you did a really good job. And that I've carried that through the rest of my life. So I'll start with that. I want to start by sharing a Franciscan benediction that I read this morning that Nat Liberage had shared on Facebook. It really speaks to me about Garnett, and I called him Garnett. I know the family called him Papa, and I just wanted to share this. May God bless us with discomfort at easy answers, half-truths, and superficial relationships, that we may live deep within our hearts. May God bless us with anger at injustice, oppression, exploitation of people, so that we may work for justice, freedom, and peace. May God bless us with tears to shed for those who suffer from pain, rejection, hunger, and war, so that we may reach out our hands to comfort them and turn their pain into joy. And may God bless us with enough foolishness to believe that we can make a difference in this world, so that we can do what others claim cannot be done, to bring justice and kindness to all children and the poor. Garnett was my youth group leader, and the best youth group story was we raised money to go to Jamaica. And I think with all of his kids, we raised a lot of money because all of the youth were allowed to go to Jamaica, and I think if we paid anything, it was very, very small amount. But some of the things that we did it was called Rent-A-Kid, which we say, oh, that might not be called, be so great anymore. But Rent-A-Kid, we went out to rake leaves and do all sorts of different things. And the thing that I remember most about Rent-A-Kid was we had to go, Garnett had connections everywhere. We had to go to this barn. And this barn was filled with manure. And all of us little city kids got in and started shoveling this manure out. And it went on forever. And we thought it would never stop. And I think Garnett and Carolyn were right there with us. They probably were doing more work, but we really thought this was the worst job ever in the world. But it taught us working together can make you get to a goal. And in that, they also Garnett taught us every minute. The songs really brought back, we sang all the time. We always sang the grace. So we were able to sing grace all along the way. We caravanned, I think, down to Florida to get the flight to Jamaica. And on the way, and I had to kind of look this up, we stopped in Georgia at Quinania Farms, and it was a lovely place where they want everybody to live together, no matter what your background is. And so we were stopped there, and if you don't know, Jimmy Carter was associated with it. They said Jimmy Carter might have been there, but he wasn't. I don't think we met him there. What stuck in my head was the Habitat for Humanity. This group also started Habitat for Humanity. So we then went on to Jamaica, and there in Jamaica, we helped Stottrell Lowe, who was a minister we had that had come here to Indiana, and he had gone back to Jamaica, and we painted a wall, and we went out into the community. It's the first time I've ever gone to a place where I didn't feel like the majority. They sent us to little churches, and we had, I think there was one other person with me, but we were the only white people in the place. And we learned so much, and I've carried that on. The other thing I wanted to say was open is another word that I just really connotate with Garnett. Open and affirming. He helped this church become an open and affirming church. And then the other thing was open circle. And hearing these songs, my family didn't go to Open Circle. Open Circle was kind of an alternative worship service, and my parents had us always come to the 10 o'clock service, but I always felt a little jealous because they all got to go down there and sing and eat lunch together and have so much fun, and they didn't, my parents just didn't take us there. But I am just so honored to share part of Downey's legacy that is really rich because of Garnett and Carolyn. And then Dan came into my life a few years later, and he has some part to share too.
Yeah, I've only been a part of this church since 1985, so it's a short history. But my first real, Garnett was around, and I knew Garnett and all those things, but my first specific memory of a conversation with Garnett actually was around or even maybe at Pat Friedley's funeral. After the funeral, Garnett came over to Mark and I and said it was so moving that we were there for Kevin at that time. And he said, I believe that you will be lifelong friends. And I thought, Mark and Kevin? But we are great friends today. But that's really the first memory that I have of a real specific conversation I had with Garnett. As Trey had said earlier, as I talk about Garnett and Downey Avenue today, it's going to be very difficult to not say Garnett and Carolyn, because at Downey, Garnett and Carolyn were synonymous. It wasn't Garnett or Carolyn, it was Garnett and Carolyn. And so if I do that, it's how it is and how it always will be. As Trey said, it will continue to be that way. Garnett inspired us at Downey to be socially conscious. He kept us up to date on what was happening around the world. He let us know if it was okay to buy grapes or not. He reminded us consistently of opportunities to be involved in social justice activities. In fact, Garnett seemed like every week had a different flyer that was specifically for me, an opportunity he had that I should, Dan, you really need to go to this. It's very important. And as everyone has said, everything was specific. I'm sure he had a different one for each one of you. But Garnett made sure that we remembered the social justice world. And Garnett helped me gain a social conscience in my life. Garnett and Carolyn inspired us to seek the advice and counsel of youth and leadership of tomorrow. They challenged us to think about young people constantly, even as we grow older and we were the young people at one point, but as we've grown older, they constantly challenged us to think about who is the next leaders and who should be the next leaders, and challenged us to, again, empower the younger people as they go forward. They challenged our theology. with ideas about the historical Jesus, which in our adult Sunday school class was quite an interesting discussion we had for a few weeks in an adult Sunday school class when we were in our 20s. As Trey said earlier, Garnett cared deeply about each one of us, and I'm sure, again, he had this conversation with everyone, every family in this church, but he always asked, how are our children? He knew all their names. He asked how they were, what they were doing, where they are, what was going on. Our youngest daughter, Maggie, has devoted her life to social justice issues. I believe that Garnett and other members of Downey inspired her, and it's because of Garnett and other members of Downey that she does what she does today. Today, we're here to honor a hero to his family, a hero to his church, and a hero to the causes he fought for.
It's an honor for me to share reflections from the family. Our families go back a long time, and we cherish the friendship that we have shared and still share. First, Carolyn, then Mark and Stephen and Laura and David and Marissa, and the son and daughters-in-law and amazing grandchildren. These were the center of Garnett's life. And he was most happy when he had as much family as possible around him. There are many, many stories, and we can tell only a few right now. Garnett loved to laugh, and he loved to make his family laugh. One of the ways that he was funny is that he was a terrible joke teller. He would always mess up the punchline or say it too early. His kids got to where they would look at each other when their dad started telling a joke and say, "Wait for it," until, sure enough, an incorrect punchline was misdelivered. Garnett loved family car trips. He was a good packer and loader, but invariably he would forget something at home. The family would all pile in the car. They would take off up Bolton Avenue, and more often than not, before the top of the hill, Garnett would realize he'd forgotten something, put the car into reverse, back up down the street, into the driveway to retrieve said item. The kids got to where they would sit in the back seat at the beginning of these car trips and say, "Wait for it," until, sure enough, Garnett would throw the car into reverse and head backwards to home. Garnett loved to laugh. When some of his grandchildren would arrive at the airport, they developed a tradition that as soon as they saw Garnett and Carolyn, they would drop their suitcases and run full steam toward them, and Garnett would always crouch down, right, to hug them. At least once, they knocked him over on his back, and he lay on the floor of the Indianapolis airport laughing hysterically. From keeping his kids waiting at the top of the stairs on Christmas morning while he thoroughly and deliberately shaved, to falling asleep in the middle of an upscale Chicago shopping mall with their dog Jolie on his lap, causing passersby to drop money for the poor man. Garnett's love, without ego, without facade, brought laughter and fun to his family. But other sides of Garnett were equally vital. As an adult, Laura's most poignant moment with her dad took place when, between her two children, she had a miscarriage. After discovering at 9 weeks that there was no heartbeat, on the recommendation of her doctors, she continued to carry the fetus for an additional month, which proved to be emotionally difficult. At one point, on the phone, she was telling her dad how sad she was and how hard it was to be at peace with what was going on. And Garnett said to her, "Laura, maybe you can think about these days as being the last days that you will mother this child." What an incredible thing, she remembers, that as a man, he could articulate something that would help a woman, his daughter, to feel better. How he captured a way to help her relax and be more at peace. Others have spoken and will speak more about Garnett's ministry and activism to make the world a better place. I will just say that his commitments and convictions were a huge part of their family life. They not only heard his words, but saw his actions of compassion towards suffering people. They have been blessed to grow up with parents and grandparents who not only talk the talk, but also walk the walk, and they continue that walk, each in their own way. And always there was Carolyn, the love of Garnett's life. While, thankfully, they were not perfect, Carolyn and Garnett were a model of teamwork and collaboration. While Garnett was the one who tended to be on the streets, in the State House, wearing his peace necklaces and carrying his protest signs, the foundation of much of Garnett's public witness was in Carolyn. Before these two got together, Carolyn had started questioning what they knew and learned in that time about race. They were eye to eye and hand to hand in their belief that the world needed to change. Carolyn grounded Garnett. She created the environment that made his actions possible. And their love and care for one another as they have aged is a thing of beauty. While Carolyn's stroke sadly robbed them of verbal communication at the end of his life, there is no question that Garnett knew himself to be loved in every single moment by his wife and all of his family. One last story. Garnett's father, A. Garnett Sr., died suddenly at the age of 72 of a heart attack. Some months later, Garnett and Stephen traveled back to Garnett's parents' home to see to some of their belongings that were still in the garage. As they arrived, a neighbor came over to see what was going on, who was there, and when he found out who they were, the neighbor became quite effusive about his appreciation and love for A. Garnett Sr. And he said, "If the world were made up of more A. Garnett days, it would be a much better place." Today, we also say, if the world were made up of more A. Garnett days, it would be a much better place. He was one of the kindest, most compassionate, understanding, and caring people we've known, and we join his family in expressing deep gratitude for the ways that we have been shaped by Garnett's life and love. Amen.
a man of peace, an advocate for justice, a lover of family, a follower of Jesus, a friend, a mentor, an example, and a generous soul. All of these things were Garnett Day and so much more. I first met Garnett years ago, many years ago, in Washington, D.C. at a justice conference. We hit it off. He seemed like a really good guy, and I guess he thought I was okay. And then I got a call from him months later, and he said, "Ken, I'd like for you to come to a conference. I think you'll like it." And so I said, "Okay, why not?" So I went to the conference. And he says, "Ken, I got you leading a workshop." I told him I'd never led a workshop before. He says, "It doesn't matter. Most people don't know what they're talking about when they do. Just go ahead." Every time I came to Indianapolis and stayed due to the hospitality of the days, Garnett always gave me more wisdom, but a lot of times I would just walk up and he would be coming out the door and he goes, "Ken, I'm going to a march. I think you ought to come along. It'll do you good." And so I did, and it did. But now we've talked a lot about how he was involved in civil rights, anti-war, and anti-poverty movements. And we know he had a special passion for farm worker justice and Palestinian rights. But what I want to do here, since we're talking about his role in the general church, in the wider church, is share just some insights and some reflections from people who knew Garnett and knew about Garnett, to show his influence and to show his importance. I got messages not from one, but from 4 persons who have served as general minister and president of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in the United States and Canada. So I'm going to start with Terry Hort Owens, our current general minister and president. She said, "We are forever indebted to Garnett for his dedication to peace and passion for justice. He stood courageously in moments when others wavered or remained silent." Sharon Watkins said, "Garnett was an active witness for the future reign of God, but also an active presence of God's justice, shalom, and wholeness right here and now." Chris Hobgood said, "Garnett was a good man who fought the good fight for the good causes right up until the end. His is a good example of a consistent, passionate, and well-lived life." Dick Ham said, "Garnett combined gentle kindness with a fierce commitment to justice. His witness was credible, as you all know, because he was authentically who he appeared to be." Others have shared in these reflections. For example, T. Garrett Benjamin Jr., pastor emeritus at Light of the World Christian Church, said, "Garnett Day was a consistent and courageous drum major for justice. Fierce in his resolve, but also full of kindness and love. He was my brother. He was my dear friend." Charles Baer, a fellow activist and close friend, said, "In the variety of issues that confronted the church, Garnett never wavered. He was a good and faithful servant, and for me, a precious friend." Marilyn Lord, who's here today, daughter of Harvey and May Lord, who were close friends of the days, Carolyn herself being a close friend of the days, remembers when she used to go to rallies and marches as a child and a teenager, and she said something I think Harvey and May would agree with, and that was that Garnett lived his values. He always sought a just and better and fairer world, and he gave of himself to make it happen. Jennifer Riggs was the former director of Refugee and Immigration Ministries, and Julia Brown Karimu is the co-executive of our global ministries that we share with the United Church of Christ. They've known Garnett for many years and have continued on a regular basis to get together with him for lunch and to discuss various things about their lives and various social justice issues. But according to them, Garnett just got antsy just sitting around and talking about justice issues. He was more interested in action. So he always had a petition to sign, a letter to be written to Congress, or a demonstration needing participants. In fact, they told me that near the end, Garnett was trying to pull them together, and he wanted an agenda, and he wanted to be on the agenda because he had another pressing concern that he wanted them to know about. Garnett's longtime friend, Pam Mason, agreed with the way that Garnett will pull people into marches and rallies and just all kinds of things. But she said, you know, and I think we saw some of this today, he also liked to sing, especially activist songs. And even though he was very serious about justice, there was always time for fun and laughter. I'm just going to do a few more reflections before I conclude. First, from Bruce Irvin of the Disciples Peace Fellowship. Bruce said, Garnett did not demonize anyone. He just kept his focus on seeking justice, loving kindness, and walking humbly with God. He embodied the peace he sought in the world. Jack Sullivan, the president of Disciples Justice Action Network, said, if there were a Mount Rushmore of historic Disciples Justice and Peace leadership, Garnett's face would certainly be there. He goes on to say his tireless pursuit of justice and his gentle, graceful presence will live on whenever and wherever the church he loved is at its best. Now, in closing, I want to highlight two reflections that very much reflect my own thoughts and feelings at this particular time. They say it better, I think, than perhaps I could. One is from Virginia Nesbitt, the former director of the National Farm Worker Ministry. She says, what a blessing it has been to know Garnett, and how I wish he was still here with us, to lift our spirits and help us lift our voices, especially in these very troubled times. And for the final remark, I turn again to his longtime friend, Pam Mason. She said, Garnett knew the secret to keeping alive his passion for justice and peace. He kept it alive by bringing it to life in others. I'd like to repeat that. He kept it alive by bringing it to life in others. And in closing, I just want to say that I think Garnett would very much want us to do the same.
As we have seen and heard here today, Garnett is just one of those people that somehow lived his life in a way that everybody just racked up story after story about him. I can't go anywhere today without telling people I'm the pastor at Downey Avenue Christian Church, and they come up to me and want to tell me a story about Garnett. Oh, the grapes guy goes to church there, right? We all have stories about how he made our lives in the world a better place. We could fill this room to the rafters with stories about Garnett Day. We invite you to continue this celebration at the reception just down the hall in Century Hall. Not where we just go to eat, but where we go to continue sharing stories. Find somebody you don't know and tell them your favorite memory, moment, story that you had with Garnett. The way that he made a difference in your life, because we all have those stories. But more importantly than that, more importantly than telling the stories today, let's go forth from this place and tell the world who Garnett was. Tell those stories of how he made